Season 1 of Doctor Who is something of a hard sell to new fans of the program. It's black and white, it's 360p, and it only barely resembles modern day Who, since as the first season of the show, said show is still trying to work out just what it wants to be. However, if there is one story from the season that people insist you must watch, it has to be the Daleks, because it's the first appearance of, well, the Daleks! Yes, Daleks are kind of a big deal in the Doctor Who franchise. And as big as the Daleks are now, back in the 60s they were as big as Batman, the Beatles, and Bond as far as cultural icons go. And all that Dalek mania, began with this story. But is there more to the story than just the genesis of the Daleks? Well, let's take a look. The Daleks is a 7-part serial written by Terry Nation, originally titled The Mutants, wherein our TARDIS team of the Doctor, Susan, Ian, and Barbara stumble onto the distant planet Skaro. Wanting to explore a city out in the distance, the Doctor sabotages the TARDIS to force the other travelers into staying with him, but things soon take a turn for the worse when Team TARDIS comes down with radiation sickness, and the city turns out to be inhabited by a group of monstrous mutants known as the Daleks, who have nefarious plans for our crew of travelers. When I first began my own Classic Who journey, sometime years ago, I was warned about filler. Given the nature of TV at the time, Doctor Who adventures were a lot slower paced in the 60s, and according to online reviewers that I trusted, a lot of episodes of classic serials were redundant and desperately dull. And the thing is, when I first soldiered on through Season 1, it felt like this was the case, to the point where I was dreading a rewatch of the Daleks, which I remembered to be especially drawn out, like butter over too much bread. Yet, to my surprise, when I sat down for a rewatch, I found myself thoroughly gripped. The pacing was tight and the suspense was high, and I genuinely wondered why I had thought it was slow and boring. And then I got to episode 6, where the TARDIS crew and the local Thals team up to launch a sneak attack on the Dalek city, and the pace suddenly slammed to a halt. As I was watching Ian and Barbara and their Thal pals make their way through a cave, I remembered exactly why I'd recalled the Daleks and the way that I did, and by the time of the big explosive climax, I had lost a lot of my enthusiasm. Speaking of the Thals, their presence might surprise some New Who viewers first entering Classic Who, since despite the Daleks having more stories in New Who than Classic Who, the Thals have yet to make a single New Who appearance. Basically, for those who don't know about them, if the Daleks are the evil race, then the Thals are the good race on Skaro, and, well, given that this good race is comprised entirely of Aryan supermen, I can see why they might give some modern viewers pause. Personally, I think though, in the context of this specific story, Terry Nation is trying to do something similar to what Joe Simon and Jack Kirby did with Captain America, where the characters who most closely resemble the fascist ideal of beauty believe and fight for everything fascism hates, as a sort of middle finger to the tenets of fascism itself. And believe me, even in their very first appearance, the Daleks are fascism made manifest. They want to kill or subjugate anything that is not like them. They're so obsessed with their warped view of purity that they're willing to turn their own planet into a nuclear wasteland. And this devotion to their monstrous ideals has twisted and morphed the Daleks into something shriveled and sickly, which can only survive inside their metal canisters and walled city. Something that I briefly touched on in the previous episode was how the Doctor in An Unearthly Child wasn't yet the hero we all know and love him as. However, what I don't think I clarified was how, even if the Doctor isn't the hero of the show at this point, Ian is. And indeed, as this is the first Doctor Who story that involves landing on an alien planet and helping out some local aliens, even if it's only so that they can get the TARDIS working again, pretty much everything you would expect from the Doctor in this story is done by Ian. There's this really fascinating Tumblr post which discusses how the Doctor isn't actually a name he chose for himself, but rather a name that Ian and Barbara gave him, and how, because of Ian and Barbara's influence, he slowly becomes the hero we're all familiar with. The post goes on to detail how this also explains why the Doctor loves 20th and 21st century England so much, and how other aspects of his character can be explained by Ian and Barbara's influence. However, there's one key detail of the Doctor that this post doesn't address, which seems apparent to me upon rewatching the Daleks, which is, why does the Doctor, as someone who can take on just about any form when he regenerates, consistently regenerate as white British guys? Well, I think it's because of Ian. In a famous New Who episode, the Doctor remarks that it was on the planet Skaro that he first discovered who he really was. But when you go back and watch the adventure he's talking about, you see that what the Doctor really was Ian, an adventurous science geek who's willing to put his life on the line for others. The Doctor is, ultimately, trying to live up to the example that Ian set, so it makes sense then that whenever he regenerates, he would want on some level to resemble Ian. Ian is everything the Doctor strives to be. I mean, look at this. Okay, this is Ian, right? And this is the Doctor's first 12 regenerations. Like, if you didn't know anything about Doctor Who, and I shuffled this face into the rest of the Doctor Who portraits, would you even be able to spot that he wasn't a Doctor? And, you know what, I'll go you one further, okay? Look, this is Barbara, okay? This is Barbara. And this is 13, right? Okay, I mean, you see what I'm saying? Maybe. Okay, here's where things get a bit tricky. The Daleks is the second ever Doctor Who serial, but it's also the first ever novelization, with the book adaptation coming out in November of 1964, just as the first serial of the show's second season was airing. Because of this, it's not technically a Target novelization, though when Target reprinted it in the 70s, the book's strong sales inspired the publisher to start its project of novelizing every Doctor Who serial ever. The reason I bring all this up is that, unlike other Target novels, the purpose behind Doctor Who in an exciting adventure with Daleks isn't to adapt the Dalek serial, but more so to adapt all of Season 1. And indeed, you might assume, like I did when I first read it, that it's actually an adaptation of the Peter Cushing Doctor Who movie, despite this book predating that film by a full year. But, you may be wondering, why would they do that? Why would they try to cram a whole season's worth of story into a single book? And while I don't have a definite answer to that, judging from when it came out and the fact that it was written by David Whittaker, Doctor Who's script editor at the time, I think it's safe to assume that this book was written for people who had missed Season 1 of the show, but who are now tuning in for Season 2 and wanted a primer of the plot so that they wouldn't be lost. And given how the serial to be broadcast immediately after this book's publication was the Dalek invasion of the Earth, which saw the return of those dastardly pepperpots, I can easily see why this is the story they chose to give most of the page count to. That being said, there's much less of the original Dalek serial here than you might think. First of all, like I mentioned in the last video, this book grafted the origin story elements of an unearthly child onto its plot, and elected to have the TARDIS crew simply skip over their adventure with the Tribe of Gum and go straight to Skaro. Also, while Terry Nation created the Daleks, David Whittaker had just as much of an influence on their early stories as Nation did, with him writing several of the Dalek comics that emerged in the 60s. As such, we get to see in this novel a lot of the Dalek ideas Whittaker himself came up with, independent of Nation's vision for them, like for instance the presence of a Dalek Emperor made of glass. Even apart from all that though, everything in this exciting adventure is just slightly off with the characters and their interactions. And a lot of this boils down to the fact that Team TARDIS has to do actions that their Season 1 counterparts did, while having their Season 2 characterizations. Ian and Barbara are now having fun adventuring with the Doctor despite him, kidnapping them. The Doctor is a charming little chappy despite doing some shady things like abducting people or messing with the TARDIS's fluid link. And Susan is more capable and mature despite everyone assuming that she's just a kid at this point. It's bizarre, and it feels like something that is almost, but not quite, entirely unlike Doctor Who. But it also makes sense for a 1964 audience. There are also some character aspects that aren't from Season 1 or Season 2, such as Ian and Barbara being strangers to one another, and Ian having a brief attraction to Susan. Oh, no, please, no, thank you, no, thank you, no. Thankfully, this attraction is dropped immediately after it serves its plot-related purpose of making Barbara jealous, and this is around the same time that I finally started to understand the point of these book original elements. You see, ultimately, Doctor Who in an exciting adventure with Daleks is a love story. Ian and Barbara are two strangers thrust into an exciting adventure with Daleks, who slowly grow attracted to each other, but who, through a series of miscommunications, aren't honest with their feelings until the very end, when they finally admit how much they've fallen in love. There's a bit of the original Daleks serial that was made much more explicit in the novel. It's surprising how much trouble can come from a small deception. Little lies that we think can make things easier for us usually have larger unintended consequences. And the overall moral of the story is that it's ultimately better to be honest with one's intentions and feelings. I would say the novel's greatest strength is in seeing literally everyone but Ian and Barbara figure out that they have feelings for each other before they finally get it through their thick skulls in time for the story's denouement. It feels unfair to look at the Dalek serial with the Dalek novel and ask which is better, simply because they're such wildly different beasts. Comparing them is like comparing apples and oranges, but since one of the aims of the series is to assist people in how best to experience Classic Who, I've got to recommend the Daleks serial by default, since it's the one future Dalek stories, including the novel, are all drawing from. That being said, I don't think I can recommend this serial 100% unreservedly, simply because those last 2 episodes really do drag. And they drag enough to lose a lot of the goodwill built up over the first 5 episodes. It makes me wish there was an abridged version of the Daleks serial I could recommend. Now, yes, I do know that for the 60th anniversary they made a 75-minute colorized version of the Daleks, but I'm afraid the colorization and remastering process of that film simply made the cheapness of the sets and costumes more obvious, the abridgment process generated some plot holes, and even in this form, the story spends too fucking long in that cave! No. Ultimately, the slowness of those last 2 episodes is a mere quibble, and it isn't enough to kill my enjoyment of the overall story. If you want to see where Dalek Mania all started, I'd still recommend you begin with the original serial, even if this recommendation recommends that you maybe watch the last 2 episodes at 1.5 or 2 times speeds. So, in the meantime, I'm Mark O'Keen, and if you like this video and would like to help this channel out, please consider liking, commenting, or subscribing. Don't forget to ring that bell if you want to catch new episodes each Saturday tea time, and don't forget to share this video to help boost it in the algorithm. Thank you all for watching, and a special thank you to the BBC, Dominic Noble, and the Terry Nation estate for not suing the pants off of me. Bye bye.